Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and today's guest is going to be bringing the heat because she has so many experiences in all sides of business. I personally cannot wait to not only hear her story, but gain her insights, learn from her experiences and her brilliance and expertise in all things business, especially from the financial side. So I want to tell you a little bit about today's guest. Her name is Sarah Romer. She's the founder of Avocado Ventures, a boutique advisory firm that provides strategic and financial insights to visionary founders and business owners as they grow, which, let's face it, we're all here for growth. And Sarah has an interesting backstory. After more than a decade in corporate roles at companies like Google and PayPal, she put her entrepreneurial hat on for the first time in 2015. How did she do that? This is an interesting one. She purchased a distressed retail business called Bella Salon. She operated it, turned it around, and sold it for 6 times the acquisition price 3 years later. It was that experience as a business owner that led her to found Avocado Ventures to support other entrepreneurs along their growth journeys. She's originally an East Coaster, just like me, but she lives in Austin, Texas right now. You can find her at music festivals, playing pickleball with friends, spending time with her family. So much good stuff that we're going to dive into today. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive into my interview with Sarah Romer. Sarah, so much that I want to dive into with you here today. But first things first, welcome to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Hi, thanks, Brian. Appreciate you having me.
Heck yeah, I appreciate you being here, especially because obviously you heard in the bio that there are so many elements of your entrepreneurial backstory that I want to dive into. But first things first, fill in the gaps for listener. Beyond the bio, who is Sarah?
Beyond that bio, I've got a lot going on personally. I'm a mother. I have 2 kids. I have a wonderful husband. I have friends. I love to travel. And I am grateful that I found a way to take all of the experience and the skills that I have to help other entrepreneurs on their journeys. And I just feel incredibly lucky to be sort of living kind of the life that I have envisioned for myself for a long time. So.
Yeah, and I feel like we have to start because any entrepreneur who looks at your professional background will be like, well, that's so cool. You've worked for Google, you've worked for PayPal, these huge tech companies that when it comes to growth, those are the types of companies we all think about and that we all talk about and we look at their growth trajectories. Walk us through your entrepreneurial background. How did your professional experience lead to where the heck we are today?
That's a really good question. And I would not be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for the time that I spent at those big companies. I really got my training and an understanding of how business works at some of those larger companies that you mentioned. And one of the common threads between the roles that I had, whether it was at media companies or technology company like PayPal, I was in a sales sort of market development role at some different companies, but calling on small business owners or local businesses. So, for example, the first part of my career was in advertising sales, and I was selling advertising to small business owners. So my clients were entrepreneurs. And then I kind of transitioned into the tech world a little bit when Groupon was a startup back. I opened the Washington, D.C. market for Groupon. Again, selling was kind of a marketing technology solution to business owners. And that was when, I saw kind of how the structure and the promotions and the opportunities worked inside some big companies on the corporate side. But then I also saw individuals, running their own businesses and making their own decisions. And that became kind of my goal for myself, was to eventually just have my own business. And, because I was calling on these retail owners, I really had kind of some blinders on around what that business could look like. It was, my vision for myself was limited to the types of businesses that I could see. So like Main Street businesses, I was thinking about, a massage studio or yoga studio, or, I was focused on health and wellness. And that's what led me to find the opportunity to buy Bella Salon. It was a distressed business where the original owner and founder had passed away. And I was working at PayPal at that time, actually pregnant with my second child, and just the opportunity, the price that the business was being sold for, and the location and the history just presented itself in a way that I couldn't say no. And I left my job at PayPal and proceeded to buy this business, and then just dived in head first and operated it, in the salon 6-7 days a week around the clock, and learned how to run a business that way.
Yeah, a lot of things that I love within that answer, one of which is that, and it's prevalent all over your website. Obviously, I've done so much research into you and your business, and the term that I always see pop up with regards to you is that you are a business operator. At the heart of what you do is that you love operating businesses. You love fueling that growth for your own as well as obviously for your clients. And you're right, you bring so many different vantage points, and one very unique one that for sure caught our eye when we reached out to you to be a guest is you called it a Main Street business, buying a spa. And when people hear in your bio, you sold it for a 6x multiple, they're probably thinking, well, that's cool. You were able to leverage your cash, which you're fully transparent about it. You bought it for $80,000. And so within 3 years, you were able to sell it. But what people may not realize is that it was not an easy journey. I've obviously read your about page. Talk us through that, because I'll paint the picture for listeners who hear these numbers. You bought it for $80,000. It was doing over $1 million in annual cash flow, but that's not as rosy as it sounds on the surface level, is it?
No, and $1 million in cash flow, but $1 million plus in overhead and payroll. When I bought the business, I had 31 service providers and administrative staff on the payroll, and I figured out pretty quickly that I needed at least $80,000 to $85,000 in income every month to pay just for the overhead. There was no profit. Even at some points there was a loss, month over month. So the overhead, because of the size of the space, the retail lease, just what it costs to keep the lights on and keep the place staffed, that didn't cover it. So, and the $80,000, I remember thinking when I bought the business, oh my gosh, this is such a good deal. I'm getting a great deal on this business, and I can't say no. And I looked around, and the value of the stuff that was in the space was worth more than $80,000. There were computers, there was desks and styling chairs and mirrors, and a whole back bar of shampoo and products and retail products to sell. I mean, it was incredible. But, within a couple of days, I realized, I didn't just buy this business. I also assumed an incredible amount of responsibility for all of these people and their livelihoods. And I had to sign a new lease on the space it was a 5-year lease, and there was a portion of it that I had to personally guarantee. So that was actually the biggest financial risk, was, over $200,000 in personal guarantee. If the business failed, I still had to pay this money to the landlord, so he had time to find someone else to lease this space. So it was, a deal on paper, but a lot of risk, a lot of responsibility. And I wasn't really paying myself at first. I was using the cash flow to just operate the business and fund some of the growth initiatives. And, selling it at the end, it felt really good. It looks good on paper, but I considered a lot of that, gain on the original investment as just back pay for the time and the sweat and energy that I put into it over those 3 years.
Yeah, I definitely hear you on that. And it's something that I don't think we talk about enough within the world of entrepreneurship, Sarah. And that's why I love the fact that your story is so prevalent on your business website. It's right there on your About page. And the headline on that page is "Stuck in Survival Mode." It doesn't have to be that way, but you experienced it firsthand with the salon and spa. And quite frankly, and I'll transparently admit this, listeners love kind of hearing the backstory to so many of my different businesses as well, is that I remember my first 30K month. I mean, I thought I was the richest man on planet Earth. I was 20 something years old, made 30 grand in a month. And then when I turned around and had to pay the people who I hired for these marketing campaigns, had to pay for advertising costs, I realized I made less that month than I made when I had a soccer blog and I made, $8,000 a month. I took home way more back then. And so it's something that even as revenues grow, entrepreneurs think that will solve all their problems. But you're right. so many businesses, too many businesses are in survival mode. Talk to us about the elements of survival mode. What is it that keeps businesses in that mode? And then what unlocks them to break free of those limits?
Yeah, that's a great question. So many, especially in the retail service business, survival mode is kind of all the time because the goalposts are always changing. Retail business is not for the faint of heart. And just when you think you're starting to make some money, then your taxes are going to go up, or your rent goes up, or someone quits, and the market changes, and you've got to pay more for people that you thought you had the right salary on. So where I see operators get stuck in survival mode is when the operator, the owner, is working in the business, not on the business. You've probably heard other people say that, but and that's where I was for most of my experience until the end. And I sometimes I look back and I wish I would have done things a little differently, but I was acting as the general manager of the business. I was in the business every day. I was, talking to vendors and sometimes dealing with customers and greeting, answering a phone if somebody wasn't picking it up quick enough, and taking inventory and placing orders. And that was not the best use of my time. So I spent 2 years in that role, thinking I couldn't afford to hire someone to do that for me. And that type of owner operator mentality will keep you stuck in survival mode potentially forever. The unlock is when you can figure out how to delegate all of the day-to-day operating activities and elevate, from the owner operator to really the entrepreneur who, with time, and maybe it's not 100% of your time, but you have to find time to step back and be strategic and think about where you're trying to take the business. What new things can you do? How is the market changing? And put that strategic hat on and work on the business, not just exclusively in the business. And that can start to get you there.
Yeah, I want to go a little bit deeper there because you're right. It is something that everybody has heard at some point or another in their podcast binging, YouTube video watching about business, for sure inside of business books, is that distinction between working in your business versus on your business. And I love the illustration that you gave us. I can picture you greeting customers, picking up the phone, and then at the end of the day being like, why am I doing all this? Like, I have all this experience. I need to be working on important things. Talk to us about some of those things. Like, especially when I think back to my entrepreneurial journey in my early 20s, especially, I was like, well, if I'm not working in the business, what am I doing? Like, do I then become unnecessary to my business? What are some of those bigger, more strategic things that you think that the business owner should really be focusing on? I'll give you an example. In the retail world, I ended up selling the business to someone who came in and saw what I was doing and that I was missing a lot of opportunity. And he, had a background in retail, big box retail, and quickly came in and identified that I should be selling more stuff. I had a lot of foot traffic, a lot of people coming in and hanging around and waiting for their appointments. And I should have been selling things like not just shampoo, but jewelry and accessories and handbags. And it just never occurred to me. And I didn't think I had the money for it. And if I had taken a step back and talked to the bank that I went to 3 times a week to drop off my cash, I could have gotten a line of credit. I could have figured out a way to finance the purchase of some additional merchandise to sell in my shop and then make more money. But my head was not in that, in that place because I was trying to, just make sure everybody was happy every day. It's really thinking of, and this is for a growth-minded entrepreneur, what's changing, what's working, what's not working, what should we stop doing, stepping away from the day-to-day to think about the big picture and the future and where you want to go and how you can get there and how, do we need to open more locations? Do we need to offer new services? That kind of thing. Yeah, I've never used this quote before. Listeners know I'm an absolute junkie when it comes to quotes, but it seems appropriate here. It kind of reminds me of that quote where you can't see the forest through the trees. When you're absolutely in the midst of it, for sure, you're blinded by all of those opportunities that it's easy. It's funny how easy it is for external people to walk in and be like, oh my gosh, look at this opportunity. And that's something we need to be doing in our businesses. And Sarah, I know part of your approach with business owners today, with all of your experiences and with this unique vantage point that you have, is giving them financial clarity. clarity. And I think it's interesting. So when we talk about financial clarity to unlock growth, obviously that is a core part of strategy. And some of the areas that you hone in on are really cash flow, controlling costs, looking into that action plan. What are those? Why are those so important, especially for newer entrepreneurs who are listening to us right now, thinking, "Well, cash flow. I'm just trying to get as much money as possible." Why do you say cash flow? How's that so important to a business, and what does that financial clarity look like on a bigger scale?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it kind of depends on the type of business that you're operating. If you have a cash business, and I'll use an example of a barber shop. All they're doing is cutting hair all day long, and they'll do a haircut and they get $30 for the haircut. And there's this, the performance of the service and the collection of the money are in sync. It's done in the same day. That type of business generally doesn't have cash flow problems. Cash flow problems start to rear their heads when there's a gap between when the services are provided and when the money is collected, or sometimes when the money needs to be put out well in advance of when the money is going to be collected from the customer. And so the clients that I work with now are often in the omni-channel retail, so e-commerce businesses or CPG with a product in the grocery store, or even a service business that has payroll, and there's a delay between when the payroll, the services are provided and payroll's due. So the issue is that profit, sometimes you can have a profitable business, but if you don't understand the timing of when you're delivering service, when you need to pay for the service or for the products, you can really get into some trouble and realize, well, it looks like my bookkeeper did my books and it looks like I was profitable last year, but I don't have any money. I'm out of money. What's going on? And that's very common. And that's where I come in and try to help people understand. I first try to understand what's going on in the business and then look at the timing of all these things. And there's a lot that can be done to improve cash flow without making any more money, without raising prices. And it again has to do with the timing and, negotiating payment terms with your own vendors, tightening payment terms with your customers, and just the timing of when money comes and goes can make a huge difference in how healthy the business is and peace of mind for the business owner.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up bookkeeping, because that's one thing that I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs, they figure, there's so many things we need to do. We probably need to hire a lawyer at some point just to go over contracts and all these other things. We probably need to hire a CPA for accounting, probably need a bookkeeper throughout the year. But you've really drawn the line here. And I think it's interesting that there is a difference between financial clarity and bookkeeping. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that, because you're right. A lot of people think, every month I see my reports inside of QuickBooks that my bookkeeper keeps for me. I have financial clarity. What does financial clarity mean to you for entrepreneurs?
Well, so bookkeeping is a great place to start. And a lot of people will come to me and they think I'm a bookkeeper, or they need a bookkeeper. And that's what I'll give them some homework. Like, hey, here's some places I know that do good bookkeeping. Go back and get a bookkeeper. But in general, bookkeeping is a function of accounting. And accounting, in some ways, it is about keeping track of the numbers, but it's really a tax. The accountants are at their core, they're tax professionals, and they have to understand all the changes in the tax code and make sure that you understand it and that you're keeping records so that you can pay the proper amount of tax monthly, quarterly, at the end of the year, whenever you pay it. So a bookkeeper, is an extension of the accounting function, and just a typical bookkeeper, they just want to make sure that you pay the right amount of taxes, or that you're taking advantage of anything that may allow you to pay less taxes. So that's where they are. They're generally not entrepreneurs or business operators, and they are not there's no assessment from most bookkeepers or even accountants of like, hey, this doesn't look right to me. Are you charging enough? They're not assessing business performance. And there are some firms that will layer on advisory services like what I do. But bookkeeping is foundational. It's just keeping track of the numbers and keeping your information organized. But there's generally no context provided to you by a bookkeeper, after they've done that part.
Yeah, I love that overview. And is there something more you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking more about the clarity, that the clarity is the context. What does this mean? And it just, one of the first things I want to do is look at someone's profit and loss statement, and that's an intro. It helps me get familiar with the business, and often the numbers aren't even being organized in a way that allows for clarity. So the first step is to look at the books and maybe reorganize how the information is being kept. And in a retail business, for example, if you're buying something, a physical product, and selling it, when you buy the product, it's not an expense on your profit and loss. It should be considered an asset. You've just traded cash for a physical good, and now you have inventory assets, and that belongs on your balance sheet. And then when you sell it, it runs back through your profit and loss statement as a cost of goods. And that's just a basic thing where if you're an early retail business, you might not be doing that. And if you don't look at the money that's coming and going in that way, it becomes really difficult to understand how you're performing. If you're making any money, it might look like you lost $20,000 one month, but you didn't. You just spent it on inventory that you're going to sell later. So just making sure information is being categorized correctly is the first step, and then you can start to contextualize it.
Yeah, I really love that you summed that up really by pointing out that clarity that comes in is that additional context, because you're right. So many times, especially, I mean, you obviously have a lot of experience inside of retail. I'm thinking so much about online stuff because all my businesses so far have been online. And I'm just like, yeah, when I invest in a marketing campaign, when I invest in a tool, it is exactly that. It is investment with future payoff, which you're right. Someone from the outside, a bookkeeper, could be like, gosh, you're bleeding money right now, but it's obviously with the pursuit of ROI. So I love that context that you're providing there. I want to ask you this, Sarah, because this will be a tricky and for sure a loaded question, but because you have so much experience on the professional side, working inside big tech companies, but with small businesses, then working inside of a Main Street business, and now obviously you've worked with so many different business owners, I want to talk to you about scale, because growth is obviously the objective of every business owner, or at least everyone who listens to the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. And a lot of them are probably thinking, okay, Sarah, what points does this become especially important? And I always love to talk about inflection points. So looking at my own business journeys, I can think of the way I got from zero to, even $3,000 a month. That's some tangible changes. Then to reach $10,000 a month, $30,000 a month, those are different inflection points. Walk us through some of those pivotal inflection points that you see and why the understanding of these concepts are important at those types of pivot points.
That's a good question. And, when I think about businesses being ready to scale, I think about kind of stages. Like you have your stage where you're just getting started and you're just figuring things out and you're trying to figure out how to make money, trying to find product market fit. Stage one, baseline, just figure this thing out. Then you start to get some momentum and realize, oh, okay, this does work. I can charge X. I have customers. I have product market fit, and you start to make some money. But the scale piece, and scale means a lot of different things to different people. But if it's when you want to start, if you want to, I do think that there's a money component to it. So, and there's things to think about. How fast do you want to grow? How much money do you have to invest? How much history do you have in the business to potentially borrow money to invest? I always encourage founders to think about a lot of things. Growth at all costs, I don't advise. And one of the reasons I call my business Avocado Ventures is I like avocados, and they're a superfood, and to me they represent health and sustainability, and so that's what I try to help founders and owners with. And I think there's a lot of like sensational business media about scaling and hustle culture and unicorns and whatever that is just sort of potentially giving people the wrong idea about what that's like. Thinking through what's your bandwidth as far as time goes? What kind of investment can you make? What sort of risk are you willing to take? And that can inform, what scale means to you. For a lot of folks, if you have a big vision, it means you're going to have to take money from other people to grow beyond what your cash flow would allow. And then that becomes a different type of business where you're not just accountable to yourself, you're accountable to your investors or to the bank, and there's more risk. And, it's different things for different folks at different times of life, but it really comes down to what your what your goals are and what you're willing to do to get them.
Yeah, I love that answer, especially because I always love a little bit of shade at the way that we traditionally portray the state of entrepreneurship, where we do celebrate those overnight successes. I can name probably 50 direct-to-consumer brands that spend way too much money on Facebook ads. They make a lot of top-line revenue, but then they're out of business really quickly. It's companies that fly by night. They're here today, gone tomorrow, and we seem to celebrate that on the cover of magazines. So I love your perspective pointing towards, it's right on your website, sustainable growth. So I'd love to hear the flip side of that. As someone who took a business that was kind of in the red, operating with a lot of revenue, but not in a profitable or sustainable way, talk to us about that sustainable growth. Obviously, once you have that financial clarity, what does sustainable growth even mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the way I was able to grow the business that I had was just a kind of a combination of visibility into the numbers and then process and systems and tracking of the performance month over month over month. And it was tedious and boring, but it drives results. An example, I figured out in the salon spa business, a core metric of success is how many of your customers can you get to rebook or pre-book their appointment for the next time, rather than just decide to call you whenever their hair feels like they need to get their hair cut. And it took about 12 months to implement a system with the service providers where they were trained and instructed on how to coach the clients through, I just gave you this haircut. It's going to be in about 4 or 5 weeks. It's going to start to lose its shape. So you're probably going to want to come back and see me. And then they would write that on a little note. They would give it to the front desk. And then the front desk would say, Sarah wants to see you back in 5 weeks for the haircut. How does next, Thursday at the end of next month sound? Kind of like your dentist might pre-book you. That sort of system, training in systems to drive growth. And that's what took the business from $1 million business to, $1.7 million business. But it was not rocket ship. It was not overnight. It was just implementing systems like that to change the behavior and generate consistent results that drove the business.
Yeah, I love that tangible example, especially because I'm going to call this out to listeners because there's so much brilliance in that example that you just gave us. But all of it starts from, one, having that financial clarity of what are our objectives. Well, if we could get customers to come back even more, that eases some of the tension for us to, or the obligation for us to find even more customers. We can win on both sides of the coin. And then the second thing that I really enjoy about that example is that you put together actions based on that clarity. You said, what can we do with this? And Sarah, I want to ask you this question because clearly you say on your website, the devil is in the details. You obviously love numbers, you love strategy, you love digging into data. But I want to ask you this because a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of solopreneurs especially, who make up a lot of the listeners of this show, they're probably thinking, Sarah, yeah, exactly. They're probably thinking, Sarah, I don't have a long-term plan. Okay, you say track month after month. What am I looking for month after month? Just positive movement and that's a thumbs up? Or am I setting tangible targets? How do you operate in that way?
That's a great question. I actually have recently hired my own business coach to help me set goals and follow through with them, because when you're on your own, there is no one holding you accountable. And I've enjoyed that in a lot of ways, but it also I also kind of need it. So I think it's a very personal sort of question around like, what are you, if you're a solopreneur like me, what are your goals? And at this chapter of my life, I have children in elementary school, and I want to provide as much value back to the entrepreneurial community as I can, but within the framework of having a lot of other important things going on in my life. So I'm trying to balance a combination of lifestyle, flexibility, income, impact. And so I've had to, just get clear on what's important to me. And in fact, on the revenue business side, like I'm less concerned about growing my revenue than I am about making sure I have as much impact as I can, but within the context of the other priorities I have as well, and managing my time and not overworking. So I think for solopreneurs, you as a successful solopreneur, you could very easily and quickly build yourself a professional services firm. I could, within 6 months, I could have a couple people working for me and I could triple my revenue and make more money, but that's not what I personally want right now. So it just depends on what you're trying to do, I think.
Yes, amen to that. It's a message that I know that listeners will really enjoy hearing. And I think it's something, quite frankly, we need to be more transparent and open about in entrepreneurship, because I, like you, Sarah, listeners can't see you, but I can see you had a big smile on your face when I talked about being a solopreneur. As a solopreneur myself, it's something that I also love. Like, that's what we thrive on. So it's smart to bring in that external help. I have people who I lean on for different elements of my businesses, but you're right. It's fun to not say, I want to hire 20 employees. I've been there and done that. And it's a different model. And I don't know how you parents do it. Having spent a week with my 5-year-old niece and nephew recently, just as an uncle, I'm just like, gosh, parents have so much responsibility. So kudos to you, Sarah, for doing that with 2 young kids. I want to ask you about this as we come towards the end of our interview today. One thing that I really love about your approach is, obviously listeners will hear it in your answers to all these questions, is that how much you love the work that you do, but also how much experience you have in leveraging within the work that you do for other clients. And particularly what I love about your business, first of all, I haven't told you this yet, you have the most beautiful website. Everyone should definitely check out your business website. So you guys will all hear the link at the end, but it is avocadoventures.co. So definitely check that out. We'll talk about it at the end of this episode. But I want to talk about your new client onboarding system, or your potential client onboarding system. You say it's 3 steps. Step 1, you book a complimentary listening call. I want to hear why you call it a listening call, because I've never seen that from anyone else. And then number 2, which I really want you to talk about, is you start with a baseline business assessment so you can identify weaknesses and opportunities for growth. What's that business assessment look like? From your vantage point, what are you looking at within prospective clients for yourself?
So I'll answer the listening call. I did have some help with my website. I had some marketing folks, experts help me with the design and the copywriting. And the listening call, I call it a listening call because I have a tendency to want to just talk and tell everyone what to do. And oh my God, have you thought about this? And it's almost like a reminder to me that, hey, I am here to listen, and I want the other party to come prepared to tell me about their business so that I can absorb and process and then kind of decide what the next course of action is. So it's kind of to remind me to shut up. And then the business assessment, it really, and I actually, the website is not, sometimes I will just roll this part into the beginning stages of a longer term engagement. But back to that first step, I need to take a look at where the business is financially, and it just starts with giving me access to your QuickBooks. You can just give me reporting access to QuickBooks, and I will go in and poke around and look at the balance sheet and look at the profit and loss statement, and I can learn a ton about your business by just having access to those financial statements and historicals, and that will that begins the discovery process, and then we'll have some conversations about what I see, and then I wrap up the assessment with, hey, it looks like you've got a lot of opportunity over here, but this line of your business is really not costing you more than what you're charging for it. And, I just give kind of my first impression of what's going on in the assessment. And then the follow-up is what are we going to do about it? And for some folks, just that assessment is enough. If you're self-motivated and you just want a third party to take a look, you could go run on your own for 3 to 6 months with the assessment and make some quick changes and get some easy wins. But if you want kind of a coach, accountability partner, someone to help you navigate what needs to happen to get the business on the right track or to grow, that's where a longer term engagement with me would come in. And what I'm looking for number 1 is, I know this sounds weird, but someone who actually wants help and is going to listen and implement the suggestions that I give. And I have some amazing clients that I know, really value the input. And when we come back to meet week after week, they've actually done some steps and things are moving and we can see progress. But if I get a sense that someone is kind of not so receptive to feedback or other ways of thinking, that can become frustrating for me. And I'm trying to, I consider that a red flag, and I try not to get involved in those relationships.
Yeah, I love that overview. It's always fascinating to hear how other people approach their sales process, because you're right. I love that the listening call is a little bit of a reminder for yourself, because you are a solutions provider. You do love solving problems, but it's so awesome to hear that part of your onboarding process is that recognition of, hey, let's first listen, then take inventory of what there is to work with, and then we'll see where we can start plugging those gaps. So I love that overview, Sarah. Thanks for sharing that with us. And as we come towards the end of the interview, I love throwing just a big, broad question, because I have no idea where guests will take it, but obviously you're going to call on all of your years of experience and your brilliance in what you do. For listeners who have tuned in, we talked about so many different aspects of financial clarity today, of growth opportunities, of understanding cash flow and timing, and all these important concepts. But Sarah, tie it up for listeners. If they're thinking, what the heck should I do from here? What's something that you think every business owner would benefit from doing after listening to this episode?
Maybe just taking a good look at the financial statements that you have and asking yourself whether or not you understand them, and if they're giving you information that you can use to make some decisions about what to do next in your business. I think way too many folks just trust that their CPA or their bookkeeper's got them, and they're not even looking. So just take a look, and if you're not understanding what you see, then maybe it's time to get a little bit more help.
Heck yeah, good advice. And for all of you listeners who are hearing Sarah saying that, thinking, well, I don't have financial statements, that's an added layer of homework for you, for sure. It all starts with that. So I love that advice, Sarah. You are obviously such a wealth of knowledge. At this point, I'd love to open the floor for you to tell listeners where they can learn more about you, your business, and all the awesome stuff that you're up to in helping businesses grow.
Well, I've got a website. You mentioned avocadoventures.co. You can find me on LinkedIn. You're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search Sarah Romer Avocado Ventures. I can't think of the URL right now. And if you think that you could use my help, you're welcome to book a listening call, which you can do on the website. And I'm happy to help if it's possible that I can.
Heck yeah. So you all heard it directly from Sarah herself. As always, we've got the links that Sarah just mentioned down in the show notes, wherever it is that you're tuning into this episode. But definitely check out, I'm telling you, avocadoventures.co is such a beautiful website, and the copy walks you through so much of what Sarah does to help businesses grow. And Sarah, you've got some awesome testimonials from so many different types of business owners. I love seeing the awesome work that you're doing. So everyone definitely check out avocadoventures.co. We're also linking to Sarah's direct LinkedIn profile in the show notes. So don't be shy about checking her out on LinkedIn, adding her, sending her a message, thanking her for this episode. Otherwise, Sarah, thanks so much for coming on to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thanks, Brian.